And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Assembly Call. As tonight, the Indiana Hoosiers fall again at the Kohl Center, 92-78 to the Wisconsin Badgers. The Badgers came in scoring an absurd 1.248, I believe, points per possession. In tonight's game, they scored 1.45 points per possession. And that's pretty much the only stat you need to know, other than the fact that Indiana didn't make all of their shots, which it seems like they probably would have had to do to compete in this game. But it was not a good night for the Hoosiers at the Kohl Center, as most nights aren't, and we are going to break it all down for you tonight on this episode of the Assembly Call. I am your host, Jared Morris. I will be joined by Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. We will break down this game as well as look ahead at where Indiana goes from here, because obviously this was a very disappointing loss. Although the Hoosiers did cover the spread, as Chronic Hoosier was kind of counting down there at the end of the game. It was a nice little cover there by the Hoosiers. And I say that because that actually leads me into my banner moment, which is that the Hoosiers fought at the end of this game. And so I know there are plenty of negatives. We're going to break all of those negatives down. But as you know, we always like to start out with some kind of positive. And I think the positive tonight, there were some positives to take from the first half. Maybe we'll get into those. But, it was 42-36. Indiana had a chance to secure a rebound. They didn't. Sam Decker got it. He ended up getting a crazy shot to end the first half. And then Wisconsin scored, it seemed like, the first 40 points of the second half. And really, it seemed like just, gave Indiana the knockout blow. And they did give Indiana the knockout blow. But it seemed like it would go the way of the Michigan State and Purdue game, where Indiana really just wouldn't compete. And at one point the score was 68-42. Wisconsin was on a 26-6 run. And to Indiana's credit, they kept fighting, and they went on a 26-14 run after that. I don't know what the ultimate final run was. It might have actually been a little bit better, to finish losing by just 14. And yes, it's a little sad and disturbing to find positives in losing by 14, but still, I think, we're looking for progress from this team. And as Ryan said, you had to be insane to think Indiana was going to win at Wisconsin. I suppose I was just insane enough to think that, although I would not have made that prediction if I knew James Blackman Jr. was going to be out. We'll talk about that later. But I was at least encouraged to see Indiana seem to learn from the experience of Michigan State and Purdue and keep fighting, keep attacking. I'm sure part of that was that Wisconsin relaxed a little bit. But it's also that these guys seem to mature a little bit and, still able to score 1.23 points per possession for the game, which is solid. They were getting to the bucket, making shots. And so as we look toward the future and what positive can we take from this game moving forward, I think the way the Hoosiers finished hopefully can give them some momentum, maybe even a little confidence going into what really is a must-win game at home against Michigan. You can't drop that game. Right now, Indiana is in a good position for the NCAA tournament despite this loss, because it's not a loss anyone expected. So needing a win on Sunday, it was good to see the Hoosiers finish strong going into that game. That might be the last positive, though, that we're able to talk about from this game. So glad we got it out of the way first. Let's go around the horn now with Andy and Ryan and get their opening thoughts. Andy, we'll start with you.
Well, I thought your intro was going towards some kind of acknowledgement that you have a serious gambling problem, and are really excited that they covered the spread at the end. But I'm glad it didn't take that turn. So that's another positive to take from this.
No.
Perhaps another is that IU actually got into the double bonus at the Kohl Center. So I just want to tell my family that I love them, and I've really enjoyed doing the show with you guys. Clearly, this is a sign that the world is coming to an end. In all seriousness, I mean, to me, it was the defense, and we can certainly attribute part of the issues to size. It's naive to say that isn't a factor, but it's also, that's not the only problem. I mean, Wisconsin had 76 points with like about 10:40 left in the game, and for a little while it was like a layup line out there. And while having a big guy at the rim is going to help with that in some regard, there were so many guys getting open to the rim that Hunter likely would have fouled out in the first half had he been there, because of the number of shots he would have needed to try to block. They're just, the same things that have plagued this team, and from a communication standpoint, rotations, forcing a guy to the baseline, but there's nobody there to help on defense. Some of those same things we've continued to see. And Wisconsin, obviously came in averaging enough points per possession to have smoke come out of the Ken Pomeroy's supercomputer based on their rating so far. But obviously not a great matchup for a defense that hasn't acquitted itself all that well. But man, it was pretty brutal. And when you go 8 of 11 from three in the first half and are down 8 and feel not that bad about it, I think that's definitely concerning. And I'm not sure anything would have been the difference in this game, whether that be Blackman, Perea, anything short of some kind of flesh-eating virus that worked its way through the Wisconsin roster. But it was definitely rough defensively, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But that, to me, continues to be the concern, continues to be the storyline, and really limits his team's margin for error. And even on a night when they were really good offensively in the first half and got to a better spot offensively late in the second half, just you can't stop anybody. It almost doesn't matter.
Indiana at the Kohl Center, the series that makes you talk about flesh-eating viruses. Ryan, over to you.
I think first I want to mention that I know he was getting some flack on Twitter. I thought Tom Crean's suit was really nice tonight. That sort of gray pinstripe thing, I liked it. Anyway, that's about the only positive I think I could draw from this game. I agree with you, Jared. I thought that it was nice to see them fight like this. But if we were, I think it was also smart to not even risk trying to get James Blackman to go in this game, because let's face it, this team for Wisconsin is what the Cody Zeller as a sophomore, Victor Oladipo as a junior team was for Indiana. They're buzzsaw, and they're going to run through people. And Indiana had no chance in this game without any size inside. With Hunter Perea and James Blackman, maybe you think they have an outside shot, but you're just not going to beat a team with that much size when your tallest guy you're running out there is 6'6". It's just not going to happen. Wisconsin is too good and too disciplined a team to not take advantage of that. With a ragged team, honestly, against Purdue, you probably, if things go better for you, you can make that team play the way you want to. Wisconsin's not going to do that. They're too disciplined. So, this was a game you're just hoping you don't get blown out in, and Indiana was getting blown out for a while. Fought back, a 14-point loss. You could say, hey, look, we figured some things out offensively the second half, blah, 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 move on to Michigan. So you've got to kind of take that as the only positive here, like you guys said. I think that the way they fought and didn't just wilt like they did against Michigan State and against Purdue. So, but yeah, just an overall a really disappointing night. As always, the night at the Kohl Center is one of the most frustrating of the year. Every year we play them. Let's look at some of the numbers. 23 fouls on Indiana, 15 on Wisconsin. Wisconsin had.
Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself.
Wisconsin shot 31 free throws. Indiana shot 11.
Andy, he's just proud of himself because he called it, which is like saying the sun's going to rise. So way to go. Way to go, Ryan.
I did call it the other day. I said this would be a disappointing night from the foul perspective. And hey, guess what? I was right.
All right, so not all 14-point losses are created equal. And what I mean by that is it is nice that Indiana battled back after really the game was over early in the second half. But I think we all would have rather this game gone, with that 8-point deficit at halftime. You're still feeling pretty good. I mean, I thought Indiana did some good things in the first half, especially coming back from that 9-0 deficit. But then that second half was just a blitzkrieg. I mean, Indiana had no answer on either end, and the game gets totally out of hand, and you kind of come running back there at the end. I would much prefer for the game to have been close all second half and then them kind of extended at the end to get the 14-point deficit, but whatever. Arguing about 14-point deficits is kind of stupid. But I guess my point here is, this game was really decided at the very first part of the first half and the very first part of the second half. Wisconsin scored the first 9 points, and I don't know how, they scored, it was probably the first 15 or 16 points of the second half, I think. It was something like that. And outside of that, Indiana outscored Wisconsin. But the question is, and Andy, I'll go to you with this, what was it at the start of each half that Indiana just wasn't ready for or wasn't doing? Because, it was like you said, a layup drill. It was like Wisconsin was playing 5-on-0, and then once Indiana kind of got its legs under themselves, they started playing a little better. But when you dig that big of a hole against a team that good, you've got no shot.
Yeah, I'm looking. I kind of took a quick glance while you were talking through that. The first 6 possessions of the second half, Wisconsin scored, I think, the first 8 out of 9, and even after the next missed one that looked like there were quite a few more. I think the first half, in particular that really came out and tried to hammer it inside of Nigel Hayes and Kaminsky. Hayes stepped out and hit a 3 early, and I think that to a certain extent exaggerated IU's problems. They really seemed intent on really closing out hard on shooters, and then they just were out of control and got blown by a number of times as they went. But the second half it was a little bit, I guess a little bit different in some cases. Decker hit a jumper to start, then Kaminsky got fouled, shocking, made a free throw. Koenig hit a 3, dunk, more free throws, layup, free throws. So it was a combination, and a lot of these ones where they fouled and got to the line were right at the rim, where it was really too late to challenge based on how they were. I thought the first half to me was kind of how I thought the game would play out. Wisconsin as a team, as Ryan said, they're going to be so disciplined in doing what they want to set out to do at the beginning of the game that you knew it wasn't something where you're not really going to take them out of what they want to do. They're going to hammer it into those guys. They know they have that advantage. They're going to continue to go to it. And then I thought in the second half, it was a little bit more of, at that point they had spread IU out. They do this a lot. They keep everybody pretty high and good spacing to leave really open space by the rim, and IU just couldn't contain the dribble. So nobody was there to help, and they were too afraid in a lot of cases to leave the bigger guys, where they just ended up, having to foul or getting beat off the dribble. I thought it was a lot of the plays off the dribble. And, to me, that's something that, Wisconsin has a lot of good shooters. I understand that, but I'd still rather, make them take threes and make threes. You're not going to beat anybody just continuously giving up layups. I thought they just got beat way too easy off the dribble, trying to close out. I thought that was kind of the difference. I mean, on the offensive end, turnovers I thought were the story in the second half in particular, and kind of felt like as Wisconsin started to build a little bit of a lead, guys just tried to do too much to stem the tide. And I thought the first half, that timeout, everybody kind of settled down a little bit. Didn't really see the same response to that timeout in the beginning of the second half. It didn't feel like it just seemed like there was still some panic there, and feel like a lot of turnovers in that same stretch.
Yeah, I think when you're focused so much on stopping Kaminsky and everybody sucked down low, and you've always got one guy in front of him, one guy behind him, that just opens up every driving lane in the book. And Wisconsin just took advantage. We were just too slow to rotate over, and it's just hard because you can't leave one guy on Kaminsky when you have our size issues. So that was clearly the focus, was to stop him or at least harass him, and possibly make someone like Decker or Hayes beat you from the perimeter. But Wisconsin did a really good job of setting it up so that we had to double off of a shooter or a driver, and it again just really hurt us all night. And so it was a well executed game plan by them, but our focus was clearly to stop the 7-footer from dominating, and obviously that didn't work.
So let's talk about the defense a little bit, and we have a few questions coming in about this, and so I want to get both your guys' thoughts. Brian Tonsini, over on the YouTube chat says, in order to defend this year, with and without Prey, it seems like we were trying many defenses. Looks like players are thinking more than playing. It's a tough situation because we need to strategize, but it may slow us down even more with Perea out. And we've got a question here from @DropZone56 who says, thoughts on Indiana's help defense. Multiple times the bailout man was out of position, back to dribbler. And, they isolated on defense one time where it looked like, I think it was Colin Hartman and Robert Johnson both got confused. Even Dan Dockich was confused trying to figure out who was supposed to help and, whether Dockich should have been screaming at Colin Hartman. And it was just something that we've seen plague this team a lot this year, which seems to be miscommunications and being a step or two slow to get to a shooter or to rotate when the ball is being driven to the basket, either because it looks like they're overthinking or no one's communicating. And, I get, some of that, we're going to have to try and switch defenses, play some zone without Hunter Prey in there, without, a good post defender. But we also have a lot of young guys who haven't had a whole lot of experience playing all these defenses. I mean, is this just a total, I guess, confluence of horrible circumstances that has led to this bad defense when you consider the lack of size, the injuries, young guys trying to play multiple defenses, and what can be done? I mean, obviously it doesn't look like this team's defense is getting a lot better anytime soon, but even just an increment here or there can help. And with the NCAA tournament right there still within grasp, that's reasonable to want, to expect. Talking about the defense has me as tongue-tied as it seems like IU's players are sometimes communicating in it. But, Andy, let me ask you, what can be done? Or is this just – is it explainable why IU's defense is so bad?
I actually didn't think tonight they switched defenses very much, and that may be because at times it was not discernible whether they were even playing defense at all. So tough to maybe categorize what kind of defense it was. But I mean, I didn't. There were a handful of possessions that were zone, but I thought mostly they tried to play man and just switch a lot of things tonight. And Wisconsin's a team that's going to take advantage of that kind of thing. I mean, you saw Yogi on Kaminsky quite a bit in the post, and Wisconsin will, run screens until it gets to the point where they find a matchup they want and they go right to it. So, again, they're a team that's able to exploit some of those things better than other teams might be, but I don't know that tonight was a lot of switching defenses. The thing that I guess the two things I would say that frustrate me the most and feel like there should be some ability to correct are kind of on-ball defense and the communication aspect. So, to me, like I said, I felt like there were a lot of times when guys just weren't ready and they close out too hard, and you've given up these open driving lanes to guys that really shouldn't be able to drive around you. I'm sorry, but Josh Gosser in his 8th year at Wisconsin after a torn ACL should not be able to drive uncontested from 25 feet to the basket and just get around somebody. And that, to me, those two things have nothing to do with height. And so I think it's easy to point to height and say, well, there's no rim protector and all that, and that's valid. But there are other things at play there, the communication, as you talked about, where you saw at times that guys were talking, and you've seen it get better over time, but consistently there's still that struggle there to really be able to know what they want to do in these situations and get that communication out. So I think those are the two things for me that feel like they're the most fixable, I guess, based on where we're at. I think this team kind of has to change defenses as much as at times I don't like it. I think they do that to create a little confusion, and sometimes that creates confusion for IU, and sometimes that creates confusion for the other team. But I think when you're not that great at playing one defense, I'm not sure there's anything that suggests they're going to be able to get substantially better at picking one of those and playing it. So I do think there's some value in switching things up, but to me, being able to contain the dribble and just continue to improve the communication are the couple things that feel the most fixable, and the things that are completely unrelated to the height of anyone on the floor.
Yeah, I think that clearly this is a group that has problems stopping the dribble right now, and hopefully with an off season and technique and learning better footwork and things like that, that'll improve. But right now, I think you're right. You do need to switch defenses occasionally, especially when you don't have that kind of size. And I know you're saying that size doesn't have anything to do with certain aspects, but I'm saying that when you do have a huge size deficit, you do need to go to zone at times. And I thought tonight, the times that Indiana was successful was when they finally just said, screw it, packed in the zone, and made Wisconsin shoot over them. And I thought that was the time where they had the best runs, because then they could really surround Kaminsky and just dare Wisconsin to shoot the ball. Without any kind of post presence, that's just the way it's going to go. They are going to switch defenses. They are going to move things around. If it's confusing for our guys, well, they've got to step up and have it not be confusing for them anymore, because it's something you've just got to get through. This is not a great defensive team, and I appreciate that Crean is at least trying to do something to change the look for opponents and give them something to think about. I mean, every time we run a different zone, the team coming in has to spend practice time working on a way to beat it. I mean, we've seen a little 1-3-1 in the last couple weeks. We've seen other things. Whether or not it works, the other team has to be prepared for it. So, it's something that is just going to be an issue all year until these guys get an off season to work on their footwork and fix it.
At this point in the season, are other teams really preparing for our defense? Just throwing that out there.
I mean,
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, technically, yes. Really, probably not.
I mean, they're aware that we'll have players on the floor, but I think other than that, I'm not so sure.
They practice against. Yeah, they practice against traffic cones like Dockage was showing earlier tonight. That's about all they need to do.
Something tells me they're working a little more on guarding us than playing against our defense. When your defense is in the 250s, which it probably will be after tonight, that's just how it is. I mean, that's just realistic. That's what this team is right now. We got a couple good questions. I'm going to get to them in a minute. And I want to highlight a couple more positives because there are a couple individual positives and we need to mention them. But I also want to remind everybody, go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on our email list because we send subscriber-only analysis the day after games. Andy does a great lineup analysis, and we also send you the link to our link roundup that our intern Will puts together. So make sure you go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on the email list if you're not, because if you're not on that email list, you miss out on some of the great information that we provide to the Assembly Call audience. So make sure you get on there. All right, a couple quick positives, because, again, there's some individual performances that I think we should mention. First and foremost is Nick Zeisloft, who started tonight in place of James Blackman Jr., played 36 minutes, scored 17 points, had a couple of boards. You know, obviously his defense, his lateral quickness leaves a little to be desired, but he fought, he was tough, and he was 5 of 9 from downtown. And, you know, it's easy to say not having James Blackman Jr. hurt, and certainly it did, but I don't know that JBJ does a whole lot more in 36 minutes than score 17 points and go 5 of 9 from three-point range. So in terms of, you know, being a leader on the road and stepping up for an injured teammate, I thought Nick Zeisloft did a great job tonight. And Robert Johnson, I thought he had some terrible turnovers, and we just have to get used to that from him. I mean, he has some of those dribble just into nowhere and turn the ball over. Those just happen. He had 3 of those tonight. Outside of that, I thought he really made some plays. He's one of the few Hoosiers with a positive plus-minus, which I think actually matches the eye test, because I thought when he was on the floor, he made things happen. He had 16 points, a couple assists, 3 boards, knocked down some threes. I mean, he was 3 of 3 from downtown. So I think individually, looking for positive performances, I liked what I saw from those 2 guys. And, you know, when Indiana was playing well, a lot of times it was those 2 guys who were leading the charge on offense. Anything else for you guys, and talk about them if you want to, but anything else that stands out from a positive standpoint? Ryan, you go first.
Yeah, first of all, that was Nick Zeisloft's best game since the season opener against Mississippi Valley State, where he had 16 points. It was his high as a player at Indiana was 17. I thought, you know, as always, Yogi battled and did what he did. I mean, they focused their defense on shutting Yogi down with Blackman out, and I mean, he was 4 of 15 and didn't have a great game, but the guy fought every single step of the way. And you gotta, you know, admire that. He only had 1 turnover in a game where we were playing like garbage. And
he should have shot about 8 free throws too, by the way.
Exactly. No, and every time he went to the rack, he turned to the official like, "What are you doing? You're just gonna stand there?" It's you know, and he's right. I mean, look, you know, we've gotten into that already, but I thought that that he played as good a game as you could expect from him given the circumstances. He was trying to drive, trying to make things happen. There were a couple threes that I thought he should have knocked down that just were off, and, you know, that happens. But, you know, he had a couple really good looks, but he was also moving around on the perimeter to get himself good looks. And he also had 4 assists. He set his teammates up, and he got everybody running, and he was a big part of that late run where they got the score closer. So I think that you know, you've always got to look at him, and I think we take him for granted a lot. And over the last couple weeks, we've really seen him rise back up to the top as we realize, okay, that is our best player, and it's not even close. So I thought he had a really nice game. But you're right, Zeisloft and Johnson both handled themselves very well at times in this game.
Andy, any positives you can choke out here?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, nobody else got hurt. That's good. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Other than those guys, I thought Zeisloft played really well. I mean, you could tell he was pretty gassed by the end of the game, but was really out there fighting. I think, that's one of the things that, obviously, the loss of Blackman in and of itself hurts. It's another guy that you don't have. It's another shooter. But, having to move Zeisloft there really diminished the bench. I mean, you had only 3 guys play, and they had a total of 7 points and 5 rebounds and an assist. But I think in the first half there, other than Stan's couple baskets, there really wasn't much there. And I thought, particularly in a game where you're trying to come back at some point toward the end, I thought they were that was one of the things that impressed me about kind of the fight at the end, because you knew the guys that were out there had played a whole lot and were pretty gassed at that point. So no, I don't know that I have too much to add other than what you said about those 2. The one guy we haven't talked about too much is Troy. Ended up with 14 points, 7 rebounds. So I played a lot better in the second half. Was much more aggressive going to the basket. drew a few of those fouls in the second half. I thought he was better there than the first half. I don't know that anything stood out. He wasn't really out of control in making some of those kinds of turnovers, but with so much action going on the perimeter, he really didn't get too involved. I wouldn't say early on, but thought he bounced back in the second half. And I think you mentioned this at some point in the second half as well, kind of with the team, with some of these other games where, he disappeared in some of these other games where they've gotten crushed. He continued to fight. So kind of going along with that storyline or whatever you want to call it, I thought he did a decent job in the second half, and just really overmatched in a lot of different ways. So I don't know that there's too much to take away from it other than hopefully help Zaisloff get back some confidence in his shot, because it seemed like I think I tweeted this last game. I think you had some similar words as well. And he hit those couple shots toward the end that were big, but it was kind of like, look, he's a guy that's not that great defensively. He's going to go in there and fight, but if he's not making shots, it's hard to justify giving him a ton of minutes. So hopefully between the couple big shots at the end of the Rutgers game and tonight, he's got a little confidence back in his shot, so he can be able to kind of be that guy that comes in, provides a lift off the bench, and can make some threes.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on what you said about Troy, I mean, the 14 points and 7 rebounds, it's somewhat misleading because a lot of it came when the game had already been decided, and yet in a certain respect it's not, because in Indiana's losses, he's been totally taken out of it the entire game and hasn't found his footing at all. And so I think it was encouraging to see him tonight fight through a tough first half where he only had, I think, 4 points, an assist, and a rebound, and come back in that second half with 10 points and 6 boards, and whether the game was decided or not, he kept fighting, kept trying to lead, and I think it's another small step in the growth of Troy Williams. So again, you go on the road and get your butt kicked, you look for any small sign of growth that you can. I think that was one. Ryan, real quick, just to add to your notes about Yogi Ferrell, his number one fan, Doc Libby, one of our number one fans, I think she's watching tonight, says another positive from the game. Yogi is now at 54 games consecutive with made threes, a national high. So congratulations to Yogi for that. And one person who does not agree with tonight's banner moment is Mr. Tom Crean. And Sam Bashuzen quotes Tom Crean, who came to his press conference a little bit late, as saying, "I know I should be more politically correct and say, hey, that's a great comeback, but that's not what we're trying to do here." So, Tom Crean at least echoing what a lot of IU fans think, which is, you shouldn't be finding any positives in a 14-point loss, and a late comeback after the game's been decided isn't really anything to write home about. So Tom Crean seems to agree with you.
Clearly he was watching the first part of the show and is really pissed at your banner moment. And that's why he was at the press conference. Way to go, Jared.
Maybe that's why. Yeah, the technical difficulties, it was delayed. The team was in there looking for some positive reinforcement. Tom's like, I got nothing to say. Let's see what this idiot can drum up, maybe make you feel a little better about this. But anyway, that's what we try and do here. We have a couple questions here. Let me get to them, and one of them kind of piggybacks on what I just said. At JHub336, what do I tell my students tomorrow morning after I guaranteed a victory today? Just tell them you watched the last episode of the Assembly Call, and I told you that IU was going to win, gave you some legitimate reasons why, and it just didn't come through. I will happily take the blame for that. I will put that on my shoulders. Andy, do you have a snarky response?
I would just go with life's full of disappointments, kids, and there's no better time to start learning that than now.
Yes, always a good lesson after trips to the Kohl Center. Okay, here's another question from Josh Wilson. Can we please get Crean on the show and ask him why he subs out the hot hand on the floor, please? I'm going to put the chances of Tom Crean coming on an episode of the Assembly Call at 0. That's probably not going to happen. However, make sure you get on the email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe, to get lineup analysis. With that said, let's talk real quick about this, because it leads me into something I mentioned on Twitter. Early in the game, it was 9-0. I mean, it looked like Indiana was going to get run out of the gym. And Colin Hartman scored 8 points to, seemingly willing single-handedly Indiana to stay in that game. And he went out of the game. And everybody was up in arms, because, hey, someone finally shows a pulse in this game, and Crean takes him out. And, I understand the frustration because, look, we all get frustrated with it, and we always see it, where a guy seems to play well, Crean takes him out. in that case, I said, well, we don't really know if his surgically repaired knee can handle that many minutes yet, and I think that's part of why he gets taken out sometimes after hot streaks. Then you look at it, and he played 33 minutes tonight. And I don't know if you guys saw it. He looked a little sluggish to me on defense. He just didn't look like he was moving as well, and I'm not a doctor. I'm just doing this with the eye test from 1,000 miles away. But it seems like he's getting beaten on defense more, and I don't know if his knee is, if that's an issue. I don't know. So let's get to that. Hold that thought for a second. Let's talk about the sub thing. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I know there are some times in the second half where Coach Crean tries to steal a quick break between the under 12 or under 8 minutes timeouts with guys like Troy and Yogi. So I understand those. Outside of those situations, though, it sure does seem to happen a lot. Is there any explanation, any rhyme or reason for why we see that, guys playing well and going out? Ryan, you're most likely to defend Tom, so we'll go to you first.
No, I won't defend him. What I'll say, though, is that there could be more going on than we know. It's one of those things where if a guy screws up on defense, then comes down and scores, and you take him out, you might have been planning to take him out before he came down and scored. And so you take him out to talk to him and go over something, and then put him back in a few minutes later. So it's not always just about what you're doing on offense. I think a lot of people get caught up in that with how you're scoring. If a guy scores 3 baskets in a row, but he's given up 4 in a row on the defensive end, or is out of position, or is leaving guys, is not helping and things like that, that could be why he's getting taken out. You kind of have to take the whole, like with Troy Williams tonight, where he had that 3-point play and came out, and Dockich was talking about it. Well, he had just screwed up 3 times in a row defensively. I mean, he wasn't where he was supposed to be on a help. Then he guarded the wrong guy off a switch, and then I think the other time he didn't block his guy out or something. I can't remember, but I remember noting that. And then he went down and he scored, and it was great. Yeah, awesome. But, clearly he had to get somebody to smack him back into reality defensively. So it does happen a lot, and I don't know what the explanation is every time. But I think that tonight, that one specifically, Troy had that one coming. But you're right. It does happen from time to time, and I don't know if it's just, the flow of the game and who he wants to get out there, or matchups, or responding to what the other team's doing. Clearly it makes sense to him, but doesn't make sense to many of us. So,
I mean, Andy, you look at this as close as anybody. I mean, the lineup stuff. Can you make any sense of it?
No. I mean, I do agree that there are times when there's a deeper explanation to, yeah, he's not a complete idiot and just taking guys off the floor because they're making shots. So I do acknowledge that there probably in his mind is some, method to the madness. But I do think at a certain point, a pattern is a pattern, and you see it enough that you can't help but wonder, why that is. And I think other combinations, I tweeted this out tonight. Of course, IU hit a 3 right after this. But in a game without Blackman, he had Hartman, Yogi, and Troy out of the game at the same time. And it just feels like I just don't know what the rationale is for that, and I'm not sure what anyone could come up with that would suggest that's a great idea. If Blackman's there and you're like, well, I'm going to let him try to, carry the load for a little while, and those guys all need a break and whatever, but, at a certain point, they're not afraid to play these guys some significant minutes, and I understand the overall toll that takes eventually, but as you said, Hartman ended up playing 33 minutes, so while I do think his knee might be giving him some issues on defense, because I did think he was one of the guys, in terms of closeouts tonight, that really got abused in some of those cases. I mean, we've seen other games where I think Yogi didn't play a minute of the last game or one of the last couple games. And so I don't know that it's a stamina thing necessarily, and at a certain point, like if you've got a hot hand, especially in both of the instances tonight, I mean, IU was struggling to score outside of the guys they took out. I mean, Williams had scored the only 4 points that IU had at that point in the second half, and we were pretty deep into it. And so, I just think that's where there's more to it than just the surface of like, oh, he just took a guy out. He's not a complete idiot that would do that just for the sake of doing that. But, a pattern is a pattern at some point, and I don't know that I can make heads or tails of it, and it's something that's going to continue to get noticed. And like it or not, the fact that Dockich is noting it on TV is going to give it additional maybe credibility isn't the right word, I'm not sure, but it's going to make other people notice it who may not have noticed it before. And I do think there's something to that, but it's definitely something that a lot of people notice. A lot of people comment on. I think because I, make a lot of lineup stuff. I do see people, kind of tweet at me about that during the game. It's like I don't really, there's not an explanation that I am aware of at this point.
You're supposed to be able to explain this stuff, Andy. We're looking for, that deep insight that will change it all and make it better. Come on.
Why don't you know everything?
I'm not sure. I'm gonna quote Ryan from the chat during the show. Do we really want to go inside the mind of Tom Green? I'm gonna say no. There's a limit to what I'm willing to do for the good of the show.
I don't want to know what's in there, but I'm sure there's like circus performers in one corner, and then there's
Oh, geez. Hey, Andy, in your defense, you are the web's #1 bracketologist. So, you do have that going for you. We can't take that away from you, even if you can't explain the substitutions.
Blessing and a curse, Bottoms. Blessing and a curse.
Yeah. No pressure on this year's bracket, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, Ryan, let's get back to the Colin Hartman thing. Because, where Indiana's at right now, Devin Davis is out. Hunter Perea is hurt. We are now relying on Colin Hartman to play a lot of minutes in the post, and he's playing 33 minutes in a game at Wisconsin. And this is a guy that we didn't even know what we were going to get from him before the season because of his knee. And he's a guy who early in the season was just dynamite off the bench, playing between 14 and 18 minutes almost every game to the point where it looked like he was a pitcher on a pitch count, to where even when he's playing great, they would never play him more than that. And now we're seeing those minutes creep up and up. And maybe on the one hand you say, okay, maybe the knee is ready, it can handle it. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not seeing it. He just looks, I feel like there's fewer Colin Hartman things per minute, if that makes sense. Like I just don't feel like he's got the same bounce or quickness or whatever it is. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the knee.
Yeah, doctors will tell you, I've had a knee injury, and doctors will tell you that consecutive minutes like that really do hurt it. And it won't re-injure the knee, but what you can do will be diminished. And, it's still not strong enough. An ACL injury, it's usually a calendar year until you're back to 100%, depending on the sport. But basketball is such a high-impact sport on the knee that's going to take a while to get back from. So I would expect him to be at 100% maybe in late March or April. But you see the pattern with him: Ohio State 24 minutes, Penn State 23, Illinois 25, Maryland 29. That was the first time he started, I believe. Ohio State 34, Purdue 26, Rutgers 25, Wisconsin 33. These last 3 games, not including today, or the last 2 games before today, were his worst 2 games, I think, of the season against Purdue and Rutgers. And then today he did look sluggish at times, although he made some plays. I think that, that's got to be wearing on him, and I think he's really going to like this next couple days off. I mean, this guy can't practice full go yet. I mean, he can't practice every day because of it. So that tells you, if you see Colin Hartman get taken off after he makes some good plays, it's because he's, like Jared said, he's probably on a pitch count, and he's probably just at a point where he can't play 10 consecutive minutes right now, and he needs to rest, and he needs to get a break, and that's for the future health of his knee. And we're not just thinking about this year, we're thinking about next year and the year after for him. So 33 minutes tonight is a lot, and I agree. I think he looked sluggish, and I think he looked slow, but he's had to take on a huge minutes load since Perea has been out, and he's sacrificing by doing that, and hopefully, this next couple days off will help him rest and get back to normal.
All right, so Indiana loses by 14. Let's move on from this game because, frankly, it's a game, Indiana was favored to lose by 14, 15 points. That's what happened. It's a loss that we all expected. Let's move on. Let's look big picture. I'm going to make 2 statements right now, and both of them are fact, okay? Tonight's loss against Wisconsin was horrible, depressing, disappointing, a terrible just outing for the Hoosiers. That's statement number 1. Statement number 2, Indiana is 16-7, 6-4 in the conference. They would be in the NCAA tournament if the NCAA tournament were held today, and they are still better than what we thought in the preseason. Those are both true statements, okay? So I think it's important to keep that in perspective. And I know Indiana's lost 3 out of 4, and that's disappointing. 3 road games, all against potential tournament teams. But now you look forward, And starting with this game on Sunday against Michigan, at least according to computer rankings, Indiana's pretty much favored in every game but one, that game at Maryland. So I know that things look and feel really, really bad right now. But it's important, just as it was important to remember after the Maryland game, that everything wasn't as rosy and it wasn't as good as it looked in that moment. Things are not as bad as they feel right now. The sky is not falling. Indiana's still in pretty good position. So, Andy, let me go over to you. And your most recent bracketology came out on the site today. If you go to assemblycall.com, there's a little link for bracketology up in the top. Click that, or go to assemblycall.com/bracketology. Andy's brackets come out about once a week. So even with a loss like this, you had Indiana, I believe, as a 7 seed. Even with a loss like this, does that really change things at all?
No, not too much. I mean, maybe it drops them a little bit, but one of the other guys who does this, I think Bracketville was the person. I follow a number of people who do this, but he kind of said something the other night, like pretty much anybody from like the 9 line down is kind of the bubble at this point. You can look at any of those teams, and there's not a whole lot there, and you can talk yourself into or out of any of them, and there's little margin for error. So I feel like they're above that point. They're one of only a handful of teams that's got 3 top 25 wins. So I think that's that becomes pretty important, and they don't have a, while we can categorize some of these losses as bad, the Eastern Washington loss, the Purdue loss to a certain extent, from an RPI standpoint, they're not crippling losses in that regard. So, does it drop them into that 8-9 range? Potentially, depending on what other people do over the course of the week, but it's certainly a game that when you look at and say, oh, they lost, it's like, okay, well, I don't know how to hold that against you. It's one of those things that's kind of odd about like the polls and things like that, where you'll see somebody lose a game to a team that's ranked higher than them, and you'll wonder, well, why would you drop that team? Your ranking would suggest that they should lose to them anyway. So I think they're still right in that 7-8 range, at least from my perspective.
And, Ryan, how are you feeling? Obviously we're all flying high after the Maryland game, and I think when you looked at the schedule, I think we all hoped, hey, if Indiana can get out of these next 4 games at 2-2, we're feeling really good, right? You're probably going to lose to Wisconsin. You're going to beat Rutgers, steal one of them at Ohio State or Purdue. Indiana didn't do that, but still, that 1-3 that we've had over those last 4 games, that's certainly helped by the fact that they did better over the very first part of the Big Ten season than anyone thought. And I guess all I'm trying to say here is that through 10 games in the Big Ten season, sitting at 6-4, you're still pretty good. And just to tell everybody to settle down, the story of the 2014-15 Hoosiers is going to be written over the rest of these games right here that are coming up. And Indiana's done a good job of putting itself in a position to have a chance for success. And you look at that schedule, it's right there for the taking. How do you feel about their chances to be able to do that?
Realistically, I expect us to lose 3 out of these last 4. I think that Ohio State, we matched up well with Ohio State. It's just we played them in an afternoon game, which are always low-energy games. We came out slow. We came out fast. They came out slow, but then they bounced back and really smacked us. And that was a game that's a lot closer probably than people remember. There were a couple times that Indiana was like about 1 play away from sort of getting on that next run and getting ahead. So that wasn't really a bad game. Purdue and Wisconsin were terrible losses. Those are just awful. We don't want to talk about them anymore. But so, yeah, 1-3 in that stretch is about what you expect. They weren't favored to win against Ohio State or Purdue or Wisconsin. And so these next couple games, Michigan is very beatable. They're struggling. This is a team you got to jump on right now, get a win. We've seen we can beat Maryland. They're not a team with tremendous amount of size. If you attack them the way Indiana attacked them the first time, it shouldn't be difficult to win that game. We won't be favored, but it shouldn't be difficult to win that game. Minnesota, that's always a team that can jump up and bite you, but I don't expect that. Purdue at home, it's going to be tough again with the size issues, but you can still win that game. And then, Rutgers and Northwestern on the road, Iowa at home, those are all winnable. And then you never know with Michigan State. You could either get good Michigan State or average Michigan State, but I typically err on the side of, for some reason against Indiana, they always show up. So, yeah, these last couple games, you should get at least 5 wins. And if you get 5 wins, you feel good about this season. If you get 4, you still feel pretty good about it. That's 10 wins in the Big Ten which, despite not having as many top-end teams this year, is still a damn good conference. And you win 4, you've got 20, and you go to the tournament. You go to the Big Ten tournament with 20 wins. I think that's enough to get you in the tournament.
Yeah, and look, if we come on here after the Maryland game and Indiana's lost that and they lost the Michigan game and we're 6-6, you'll start to hear a little more sky is falling talk here. But that's not the case right now, and I think it's important to just again remember what the expectations were. Remember what this team has done. This is a little lull. These happen over the course of a long season, especially when you have 3 tough road games like this, kind of all sandwiched together. But again, all is not lost, and there's a really big opportunity here, I think, for Indiana, obviously starting with this Michigan game and then over the balance of the season to finish with some momentum heading into the Big Ten tournament and hopefully into the NCAA tournament. Ryan, you're claiming to have a positive.
Hey, I do have a positive. Wisconsin is not on our schedule for the rest of the year. That is a positive.
And hey, if we do end up playing them in the Big Ten tournament, that's a good thing, because that means that we won a game.
Yep,
Or that we made it all the way to the finals. So yes, and that's the other thing to remember is, and Andy, tell me if I'm crazy here. And we might have talked about this on a previous episode, but I feel like you can't really judge a team by its best wins at home, but you also can't judge a team by how it does. I feel like on the road against really good teams, to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, if you want to be an elite team, then you do. But the expectations for this team weren't an elite team. We know they're not an elite team. Success for this team was measured as get in the tournament, maybe win a game or two because your offense is clicking. And so I think you look at Indiana, I don't judge us by the Maryland win, and I don't judge us by the losses at Michigan State and Wisconsin necessarily, but what have you done in those intermediate games? And I look at it and, we beat Butler, and we went on the road and beat Illinois, and we've had some good home wins. And, to me, that means that we're sitting there solidly, not in the elite, obviously, not in the great, but right after that, we're right there. And I know that's not where Indiana wants to be, and we all strive for more, but realistically, could we expect more from this team this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I think the only concern that I would have is that, and this was kind of what Ryan and Ken Bykoff were having a conversation about on Twitter was, this is now 4 of the last 5 road games where IU's lost by double digits. So I agree that a game like tonight, if there's any game that when the schedule came out at the beginning of the year, if you said, give me one game that you're going to say you have the least confidence in IU winning, it would have been this one. It wouldn't have been Louisville. It wouldn't have been anybody else. It would have been this one. And I think that only got exaggerated more without Perea and some of the defensive woes. It just exaggerates the advantage that Wisconsin, had over IU coming into the season. So I would agree with that to a certain extent in terms of, you can't really be defined by, you shouldn't get dinged for the best team you play on the road. Losing to them is not the end of the world. And, playing as well as they've played against Maryland is equally unrealistic to think that you'll do over the course of time. So, I mean, I would agree. I definitely, this team is not, at least in my eyes right now, I guess they're a bubble team in the sense that they're not in the tournament, but there's some separation for me between them and even a team like Michigan State, who really hasn't beaten much of anybody outside of IU, I guess, and a game against Iowa. I mean, they didn't do anything in the non-conference, and they really don't have a lot on their resume. And even Iowa, to a certain extent, has got a couple good wins. They swept Ohio State, but there's a lot of kind of chinks in their armor as well. So I think when you compare IU to some of the other Big Ten teams, they're probably in better shape than the vast majority, kind of on a somewhat level field with Ohio State at this point based on how well they've been playing of late. But yeah, I definitely, they're not going to be mistaken for an elite team. They could look like it offensively at times and have looked that way offensively a number of times over the course of the year. But the ceiling of this team is ultimately limited by the defensive issues that, while they might improve a little bit, they're going to have to be relying on outscoring people. And that's just, we're enough games into the season to have a really good feel for that. And I feel very confident in saying this team isn't going to stop anybody on the defensive end and win games in that way. They're going to have to limit turnovers, play as well as they can on offense, and just outscore somebody.
The difference, of course, between IU and Michigan State is if Michigan State does make the tournament, we'll all pick them to somehow make the Final Four. Just because they're the Spartans. All right, so let's wrap up here. We'll get picks on Michigan. Real quick, here's a quick brain bender for you, Ryan. Mike Pegram quotes Tom Crean in the postgame press conference as saying, "Our guys are young. It isn't his excuse. It isn't an excuse. It's a fact." However, isn't stating that fact in a postgame press conference an excuse?
No, didn't you listen to our coach? It's a fact, not an excuse. Yeah, and then he said something.
Ryan's clearly blinded by that suit tonight. You can't ask him questions about Crean.
Hey,
you heard him talk about.
Hey, that was a definition of a smart suit, man. The guy knows how to wear a suit.
Hey, real quick, can we give a quick shout out to the old guy sitting behind Dan Dockich and Mike Tirico tonight? Did you guys see him?
He was my MVP.
Yogi's mom knows what I'm talking about if she's watching. She was tweeting about him too. I don't know if he could play post defense, but if he could, we should have signed him up. He was the MVP.
He seems stationary. He could step in and take a charge. I think he's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I was going to say though, he did also say that that Indiana is 335th in the nation in experience, and that as a result, the team really doesn't know how good it can be. I think that's a fair point. I mean, these guys see a team like Wisconsin, and one of two things either happens. Maryland happens, where they just say, "Oh, we're going to jump on these guys. They don't know what we can do," like blah blah blah, or they say, "Oh man, that's Wisconsin." And tonight it was the latter. It wasn't the former. And I think that they don't understand yet that there are ways to beat a team like that. It's just extremely difficult.
Yep. All right. Well, let's wrap things up here. It's almost 9 o'clock here Central, 10 o'clock Eastern time. After another porous IU road performance, which hopefully will stop. You look at the rest of the road schedule real quick, and it's at Maryland, which obviously is going to be a real tough one, and then it's at Rutgers and at Northwestern. So, I mean, the only two road games you have left after that Maryland game are ones you expect to win. So, hopefully Indiana can at least end with some momentum playing away from Assembly Hall. But, I'm not going to take either one of those games for granted because we know anything can happen on the road in the Big Ten. Real quick, Andy, you want to give us a scouting report on this Michigan team that's coming in? Because I got to be honest with you, I don't know who they have left. I don't know who's healthy. I don't really know what to expect from this Michigan team.
Yeah, health is kind of a moving target with them, although they've actually played pretty well, all things considered. But Karis LeVert is definitely out. Derek Walton has been out, I think, the last 2 or 3 games with I believe a foot or a toe injury of some kind. So I am not sure what his status looks like, but he, was one of their other better players besides LeVert. They actually have, really come together pretty well. They're really young. I kind of looked up, while Ryan mentioned that, where different teams rank in the experience rankings on Pomeroy. Michigan's 329. Then I would argue if you factor out the guys who actually aren't playing anymore, they're probably younger than that. They're playing a ton of freshmen, pretty regularly.
Andy, will you clarify if that is a fact or an excuse?
I guess it's a fact. I mean, I guess because I'm saying it, it makes it a fact. I think if the coach says it, you could draw a different conclusion. I'll go with it that way. So I mean, a little bit tough to gauge. I think it'll be a tough environment for them to come in, but they also just went to the Breslin Center and took Michigan State to overtime and played really well. So I think they don't have a ton of size, so that bodes somewhat well for IU. They don't really have guys that they're going to dump the ball into, at least in the post. But they do have some decent size with some of these guys on the wing, and they're definitely going to try to spread them out and put it on the floor. Some of the things we've seen them do over the past few seasons with the LeVert last year. Hardaway Jr., some of those guys. So I think it'll be a tough matchup defensively, as pretty much everyone is for IU at this point. But really going to have to contain the dribble. I think the good news is that again, they're not going to have a back to the basket type guy like a Kaminsky that they'll be able to dump it into. So I think that is probably the biggest positive you can get. And Michigan's actually been pretty good defensively, looking at least Pomeroy stats through, I guess, coming into today's games. They're actually 12th in offensive efficiency. The thing they do best is really not turn the ball over, but they don't get to the line a lot, don't get a ton of offensive rebounds, and really haven't shot it all that well. Defensively, they're tops in the league in Big Ten games of defending the 3-point line, which again, I don't know how much stock I put into some of those kinds of stats, but it is what it is. So that'll be something that IU can watch for, especially coming off the way they shot tonight. But again, I would say a game at home, based on the pieces that Michigan is missing, that IU should be able to handle, and I think a good extra day or two off for IU based on the fact that this is a Tuesday game going into Sunday. They played, I think I looked it up, 5 games in 13 days, maybe 4 in 10 days, something like that. I mean, it's been a pretty heavy stretch of games for IU. So I think getting them this extra time until Sunday will probably serve them well. And some guys are getting pretty worn down playing these extra minutes as they have. So I think that should help as well leading up to that game. And like I said, I think based on who Michigan has, definitely feels like a game they should win. Michigan's got a bit shorter turnaround. They play Iowa at home on Thursday. So hopefully all that comes together for an IU win.
So your official prediction is an IU victory?
Yeah, I'm back on. I said multiple games ago that I would not pick IU against Wisconsin, and so even though I was on the show, I assumed that had been implied from my prior comments. But yeah, I mean, I think unless we really start to see, further, defensive decline, whatever you want to call it, I think I'll find myself hard pressed to pick against IU in some of these home games based on how they've played at home, even against better competition and what you'd expect to be a good environment. So I'll stick with that in this one, and then kind of see how they play from here and decide on the Maryland game after that.
Ryan, your official pick.
Against Michigan, I'm going with IU. I think the Assembly Hall is going to be live, and it's going to be a good, nice home game for them. And I think that the way they finished up this one will help lead into that game, and they'll show some fight.
Yep, I agree. I like how the Hoosiers finished tonight, and I think that's just some good momentum going into Michigan. Obviously, we beat Michigan at home last year in one of the more memorable games from last season. Yogi was terrific. And I expect a big game from Yogi in that game as well.
I will say that was the Phillips Magic game. I was at that game with my parents, and Yogi went off, so I will take full credit for that.
Yes, the Phillips Magic game. Very nice. Okay, let's let the Phillips Magic lead us in here to final thoughts, and let's go right back to the Phillips Magic. Ryan, lead us off.
Like Jared said, this team is still far ahead of where anyone expected it to be, and if they beat Michigan, improved to 17-7 on the season, again, far better than anyone expected things to be at this point, and still in the mix for, I mean, it may seem weird at this point, but they're still in the mix for a bye in the Big Ten tournament, aren't they? I mean, if they get one of those top 2 seeds, they get through, I believe, if that's still the case, now that we have however many teams in the Big Ten now. But they're they're towards the top of the conference, and no one expected that. 6-4 could easily become 7-4, 8-4, with just playing solid, and they need to sort of get back, and they have a long week to prepare for that game on Sunday, and I'm sure there will be some Maryland prep in there as well. So you've got a group of guys who obviously didn't get the result they wanted tonight, and I think we'll bounce back and play very well on Sunday.
Mr. Bottoms.
Yeah, I don't know that there's too much more to say than we've talked about so far. I think all those points are valid. We've kind of gotten through what we likely would have deemed the let's just survive this part of the schedule in the early going, and now you've got it set up for what we've talked about since the beginning of the season. Particularly since the beginning of Big Ten play, is things, you get a little bit of a breather down the stretch. No game is a foregone conclusion. Certainly with this team and the way they've played defense, I'm not chalking up a win automatically over anyone, as the game against Rutgers showed. But you got 8 games left, 5 of those at home, 2 of the road games against lower tier teams in the conference. It's all right in front of you, and it's just a matter of taking advantage. And so. If it's a case where this team may not realize how good it can be, maybe this is a chance for them to figure some of that out. But they've shown stretches even tonight against one of the better teams in the country. They were able to score well. They've got to find ways to do a bit more to limit things on defense and continue that. But everything, if you'd set out goals at the beginning of the season outside of a Big Ten championship, I think the goals that would have been deemed realistic for this team are all right in front of them at this point. And so now it's time. You survived the rough stretch, and now it's time to take advantage of the of when things get, relatively speaking, get a little bit easier. So I think that's what, maybe is the next step of maturity for this team, is to be able to seize those kind of opportunities and let a couple chances slip away on the road that we thought they might have a chance to win, but doesn't mean anything for these games. And I'll really be interested to see how they can mature and how they take advantage of those things down the stretch.
Yeah, very, very well said. I think, again, this team is in a good position, but now is the point in time where that could start to change if the results don't improve from what we've seen the last 3 out of the last 4 games. Because, Indiana has continued to kind of stay ahead of the 8 ball, been playing with house money a little bit. And, when you're sitting at 5-1 after that Maryland game and everything is so good, no one was expecting that, and now you've lost some games, but now you're heading into that part of the schedule where you're expected to win some of these games. And I feel like sometimes this Indiana team has played a little bit better when it hasn't necessarily been expected to do as well than when it has. And so, as you said, this is now the next step in maturity for this team. Can they take care of a home game against a good but not great Michigan team, a team not as good as them, that is wounded? Can they take care of that team at home? Indiana should. I think they will, but we'll find out on Sunday. Because if you drop that game and if you drop the Maryland game, now things start to get pretty tight with Minnesota and Purdue coming in, and both of those teams are good enough to beat you even on your home floor. So this is a really important game for Indiana against Michigan. I think you hesitate to call any game must win at this point in the season, but it's certainly important, and I think it will really tell us a lot about the trajectory of the rest of the season. And I'm optimistic because I think this team has shown me more than I expected. It's in a better position than I expected it to be. And I think its offense is good enough that most nights it can overcome the defense. And we'll see. There's a lot of games on this schedule now Indiana should win, can win. The question is, will they? We'll be able to follow along and see if it happens. And, of course, after every one of them, we'll be here with another episode of the Assembly Call. We appreciate you all watching live tonight. We appreciate you if you listened on the podcast. Again, go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on the email list. We'll have a new email out for you tomorrow morning. With that said, have a great rest of your week. It'll be a while until we talk again. We will talk Sunday after IU Michigan. Have a good night, everybody.